You warned them. They didn't listen. 2 years after my in-laws moved into my house for what they called a temporary stay, my mother-in-law placed a transfer document on the kitchen table and told me to sign over the home. My husband sat beside her, silent. The part that still bothers me is that they had not moved in because they wanted my house. They moved in because they had already lost theirs. The question was whether understanding that desperation meant I had to surrender the place I had spent years paying for. I still do not have a clean answer to that question. I have an answer for what I did, though. I had the paperwork reviewed, I started the legal removal process, and I offered help only after the house was no longer being treated like family property. Before all of this, my life was ordinary. I was in my 30s, working full-time, and living in a modest 3-bedroom house in a suburban neighborhood. The house was mine. Not partly mine, not something my husband had bought with me. Mine alone, purchased before our marriage, and maintained through my income and savings. My husband Daniel moved in after we married. We had talked about eventually refinancing or buying a different place together, but we had never changed the title. That detail sounded boring at the time. Later, it became the one fact nobody in the house could argue with. Daniel's parents, Robert and Linda, lived about an hour away. Our relationship had always been polite, but tense. Linda had strong opinions about everything from grocery brands to how a living room should be arranged. Robert usually followed her lead. Daniel knew this, but he had a habit of treating conflict like a smoke alarm, something annoying that might stop if everyone waited long enough. Then they called us one Sunday evening. They said they needed a place for a few months. Their housing situation had become unstable, and they were trying to arrange something else. They emphasized the same phrase several times. Just a few months. They would stay in the guest room. They would contribute to utilities. They would keep their belongings contained. They would leave once they found a new rental or another arrangement. I asked direct questions. How long was a few months? What money would they contribute? Who would handle groceries? What would happen if the search took longer than expected? Linda laughed gently and said I was making a family favor sound like a business contract. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table and told me not to worry. They were his parents. They were not strangers. That was my first mistake. I let the emotional label replace the practical agreement. We never signed a written occupancy agreement. We never set a move-out date. We never clarified whether their contribution was rent or simply help with expenses. We did not discuss guests, keys, parking, storage, or what would happen if one of us wanted the arrangement to end. We said yes anyway. At first, they tried to be considerate. Their suitcases stayed in the guest room. They asked before using the laundry. Linda cooked twice during the first week, and Robert fixed a loose cabinet hinge. Daniel looked relieved. He kept saying the arrangement would be good for everyone. Then the first small rule changed. I usually worked early in the morning, so I prepared coffee and breakfast the night before. Linda began using the kitchen at 5:30, leaving pans in the sink and moving my containers. When I mentioned it, she said she needed the counter space. It was not a serious fight. That was why I ignored it. A week later, she moved several items from the pantry and labeled a shelf for herself. Then she told me we should stop buying certain foods because they were too expensive. I reminded her that I paid the mortgage and had a budget. She replied that everyone living in the house should have equal input. Equal input sounded reasonable until I realized she meant equal control. Robert started parking in the spot closest to the front door. He told me it was easier for him to carry things. Then Linda began using the living room during my evening work calls. When I asked for quiet, she said I could work in the bedroom instead. The house was changing in ways that were easy to dismiss individually and impossible to ignore together. The television schedule changed. Dinner times changed. The thermostat changed. My storage closet became their overflow space. A box marked with my name disappeared into the garage, and when I asked where it went, Linda said she had needed the shelf. I brought it up with Daniel. He agreed that his parents were being inconsiderate. Then he asked me not to make it bigger than it was. They were under stress. We could be flexible for a little longer. That phrase became the unofficial rule of the house. A little longer. The first clue that something deeper was happening appeared in the mail. A letter addressed to Robert and Linda arrived at our house. I assumed it was a billing notice or a piece of forwarded mail. Linda took it from my hand before I could set it on the counter. Her face changed for half a second. Then she folded the envelope and put it in her robe pocket. I asked whether everything was okay. She said it was private. That should have been the moment I demanded clarity. Instead, I told myself adults were entitled to private mail. A few days later, Robert asked whether the neighborhood had rules about long-term guests. He said he was curious about parking and mailbox access. I told him the neighborhood had an HOA and that I could check the regulations. He said there was no need. Linda had already looked into it. That sentence stayed with me. Why had she been researching the rules if they were only staying for a few months? I asked Daniel. He said his mother was probably trying to be respectful. I wanted to believe him because the alternative meant she was planning around us instead of with us. Then the spare key disappeared. I had kept it in a small dish near the entryway. One day, it was gone. Linda said she had moved it to a safer place. When I asked where, she told me she had given it to a relative who might need to check on the house. I stared at her. This was my house, and she'd given someone a key without asking me. Daniel finally objected. Not strongly, but enough to make Linda fold her arms and say that families should not need permission to protect family property. There it was again, family property. I told Daniel that the house was not family property. It was my property. He said he knew that legally, but he did not want to turn every disagreement into a courtroom argument. I was not talking about court. I was talking about a lock. The situation worsened after their supposed move-out month passed. When I asked about their plans, Robert said the rental market was difficult. Linda said they were waiting for the right opportunity. Daniel said they needed more time. No one offered a new date. Their belongings spread from the guest room into the hallway, the basement, and part of the garage. Their names appeared on Package S delivered to the house. A neighbor told me Linda had introduced herself as the person managing the household. I laughed when I heard that. Then I realized I was not laughing. The next clue arrived as a calendar change. Linda placed a large family calendar on the refrigerator. She wrote down dinner assignments, cleaning tasks, and dates when Daniel and I were expected to attend family events. My name appeared beside chores I had never agreed to. The calendar made the house look organized, but it functioned like a schedule issued by someone in charge. I removed it. Linda put it back. I removed it again, and this time Daniel told me to stop escalating things. That was the night I asked him a question I had been avoiding. If his parents refused to leave, would he support me in making them leave? He did not say yes. He did not say no. He said he could not choose between his wife and his parents, but the choice had already been made by the person who refused to act. Neutrality sounds fair when two sides have equal power. It is not fair when one side owns the house and the other side controls the daily life inside it. Every day, Daniel refused to intervene. The arrangement became more permanent. I began keeping a private record. I wrote down when the keys were shared, when rooms were taken over, when my belongings were moved, and when I asked about a departure plan. I saved messages where Linda described the house as their place. I photographed the condition of the guest room and the storage areas. I was not trying to build a revenge story. I was trying to stop doubting my own memory. Then the mortgage statement arrived. It was addressed to me, and I opened it at the kitchen counter. The balance and payment history were normal. The unusual part was not the statement itself. It was the way Linda watched me read it. She asked how much was left on the loan. I asked why she wanted to know. She said the answer would help the family make a responsible plan. If the house had enough equity, maybe everyone could benefit from it. I told her the equity was not available for family planning. It belonged to the owner. She replied that ownership was a technical detail and family security was the larger issue. That was the first time she openly connected their security to my house. I asked Daniel to meet me privately. We sat in the car in the driveway because I did not want the conversation overheard. I told him that his parents were no longer acting like temporary guests. They were testing whether we would accept them as permanent decision makers. Daniel rubbed his forehead. He said they had lost a lot recently. He would not explain what that meant. He asked me to give him one more month to get them settled. One more month became the final delay. A week later, Linda approached me with a folder. She said she had spoken with someone who understood real estate. She did not identify the person. Inside the folder was a document that appeared to transfer an interest in the house to her and Robert. I did not sign it. I asked whether she seriously expected me to give them ownership. She said they had invested time, labor, and money into the household. She said the house had become the family's shared refuge. She said transferring part of it would protect everyone if something happened to me. I asked what would protect me if something happened to them. She had no answer. Robert entered the room and said I was being dramatic. Daniel stood near the doorway. Again, he said nothing. I placed the document on the table and told them the property was titled solely in my name. I'd bought it before my marriage, and I had continued paying the mortgage and expenses. Their presence in the house did not create ownership. Linda's expression hardened. She said paper did not erase family obligations. I said family obligations did not rewrite a deed. That sentence changed the room. For the first time, the argument was not about dishes, schedules, or parking. It was about control. Linda had assumed that staying long enough, contributing in small ways, and presenting herself as the household manager would make ownership feel inevitable. But feeling inevitable is not the same as being legal. I contacted a local housing attorney for advice. I did not pretend to know the rules. Depending on the jurisdiction and the facts, people staying in a home may have tenant-like protections, even without a formal lease. I needed to understand the correct process before taking action. The attorney reviewed the timeline, the messages, the payments, and the ownership documents. The advice was simple but difficult. Do not change the locks, remove their belongings, shut off utilities, or threaten them. Give proper notice and follow the court process required where the property was located. That was the second mistake I almost made. I wanted the lock changed that night. Instead, I followed the process. I gave written notice ending the permission for them to stay. I offered a reasonable move-out period and stated that any continued occupancy would need a separate, written agreement. The notice did not accuse them of stealing the house. It simply established that the temporary arrangement was over. Linda tore her copy in half. Robert told Daniel that I was trying to destroy the family. Daniel asked me to withdraw the notice until everyone could calm down. I told him the notice was not a mood, it was a boundary with a date. For several days, nothing happened. That silence was worse than the arguments. I wondered whether they would leave quietly. I wondered whether I had gone too far. I wondered whether Daniel and I could survive the humiliation of a court filing, even if the filing became necessary. Then I found another envelope. This one was not addressed to them. It was a letter from a storage company warning that their unit was past due and scheduled for a sale if the balance was not paid. The date on the letter was from before they moved in. I showed it to Daniel. He looked at the floor and finally told me the truth. His parents had not simply been between homes. Their house had already been lost, the mortgage had fallen behind, a sale had occurred, and the remaining belongings had been moved into storage in our garage. They had hidden the situation because they were ashamed and terrified of what would happen next. That explained the mail. It explained the HOA questions. It explained why Linda had acted as if our home had to become their permanent security. It explained the urgency behind the transfer document. It did not excuse the deception. It did not make the unauthorized key acceptable. It did not make my work schedule, privacy, or ownership less important. Desperation explained their behavior. It did not give them permission to control me. I asked Daniel why he had not told me. He said he thought the truth would make me reject them. Then he admitted that he had been hoping the problem would solve itself if everyone stayed calm. That was the real reason he had remained neutral. He was not protecting fairness. He was protecting himself from choosing a painful side. The notice period ended without a move-out plan. I filed the required court paperwork. The hearing was not dramatic. It was paperwork, dates, identification, and a judge asking whether the occupants had permission and whether that permission had been properly ended. Linda argued that she had contributed to the household. Robert said they were family. I provided the ownership records, payment history, written notice, and messages showing the arrangement had been temporary. The court did not decide whether they were good people. It decided whether they had a legal right to remain after permission had ended. The order required them to leave. Even then, I did not feel victorious. I felt exhausted. I felt guilty. I felt angry that compassion had been used as a reason to ignore consent. I also felt grief for the fact that my husband's parents had lost their home and were now losing the only place they believed they could depend on. I offered conditional assistance. I would help them locate temporary housing and apply for available local programs. I would pay 1 month of a modest rental directly to the landlord if they signed a written agreement and left my house by the court deadline. I would help move their stored belongings, but I would not give them a deed, a mortgage interest, or an open-ended right to return. They rejected the offer at first. Linda said I was putting conditions on family love. I answered that conditions were the only reason the original arrangement had existed at all. Without dates, responsibilities, and consent, help had become permanent control. A day before the deadline, Robert called me. He asked whether the offer still stood. It did, but only under the same terms. They moved into a small rental. The arrangement was not comfortable or glamorous. It was, however, theirs. Their belongings left my garage. The spare key was returned. The refrigerator calendar disappeared. The house became quiet again. Daniel and I began counseling. The biggest issue was not his parents. It was that he had treated indecision as kindness and left me to carry the consequences. We had to create rules for financial help, relatives staying overnight, shared property, private documents, and what would happen if either of us felt unsafe or overruled in our own home. Our relationship was renegotiated, not magically repaired. Linda and Robert still believe I handled the situation harshly. I still believe they crossed boundaries that could not be repaired with apologies alone. We speak occasionally. I help with specific needs when I choose to, and I do not give money or access without clear terms. The strange part is that once the house was no longer available as a possibility, our conversations became more honest. Linda stopped pretending she had a claim to the property. Robert stopped pretending everything was temporary. Daniel stopped saying that choosing a side was the same as betraying a parent. The home itself did not become more valuable because of the conflict. The deed did not change. The mortgage did not change. What changed was my understanding of what ownership actually required. I used to think owning a home meant paying for repairs, making the payments, and keeping the documents in a safe place. Now I think it also means accepting responsibility for the boundaries attached to that ownership. If I invite someone in, I need to say what the invitation means. If the arrangement changes, I need to say so before resentment turns into evidence. There were clues I ignored because each one seemed too small. The hidden mail, the neighborhood questions, the missing key, the calendar, the mortgage inquiry, the transfer document. Each clue was a quiet warning that the emergency shelter was becoming a claim of authority. The twist was not that my in-laws had secretly planned everything from the beginning. The truth was messier. They were frightened people who had lost their own home and began treating mine as the only remaining answer. Their fear made their behavior understandable. It did not make it acceptable. That distinction matters outside family drama too. A person can be desperate and still be wrong. A person can deserve help without receiving control. And the person offering help is allowed to define what that help includes. If I could go back, I would not necessarily refuse them immediately. I would put the arrangement in writing. I would set a move-out date. I would require clear contributions, privacy rules, key restrictions, and a plan for what happened if the deadline passed. Most importantly, I would not let Daniel postpone the conversation every time it became uncomfortable. I also would not wait until someone placed a transfer document in front of me to confirm who owned the house. The update is that the rental arrangement has continued. I am not saying everything is peaceful. Family relationships rarely become simple after a legal removal, but the relationship now has a shape. Visits are scheduled. Financial help is specific. No one treats my home as a shared resource without asking. Could I have handled it with more warmth? Probably. Could they have handled their crisis without deception and entitlement? Absolutely. The open question is the one I still debate. When someone loses everything, how much responsibility does family have to provide a safety net? And where does that responsibility end? I believe the answer has to include both compassion and consent. Without compassion, help becomes cruelty. Without consent, help becomes control. That is what I learned from the 2-year temporary stay. A home can be shelter, security, and family refuge, but it cannot be all of those things if only one person is allowed to decide who controls it. And if someone tells you a few months has no exact ending, do not assume the ending will take care of itself. Put it in writing. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Check the documents. Protect the relationship by making the boundary clear before the boundary becomes a court case. Because sometimes the person asking for your home is not a villain. Sometimes they are scared. Sometimes they have already lost theirs. But if they are asking you to surrender ownership as proof that you love them, the answer still has to be no. Told you so. The words sounded less satisfying than I had expected. I had imagined that once the rental arrangement held and the house was finally mine again in every practical sense, I would feel vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. Being right had not restored the 2 years I had spent checking locks, hiding paperwork, and wondering whether every family conversation would become a negotiation over my own front door. For 6 months, nothing happened. That was almost harder to trust than the chaos. Linda and Robert sent birthday cards. Daniel visited them every other Sunday and came home with the same careful expression he used when he was trying not to bring a problem through the door. I did not ask for reports. He did not volunteer them. Then, on a Wednesday morning in October, I received a call from the property manager of their rental. She introduced herself, confirmed that I was Daniel's spouse, and asked if I knew where Linda and Robert had gone. I was standing in my kitchen with a mug in my hand. For a moment, I thought there had been an accident. "What do you mean, where they've gone?" "They stopped paying rent 3 weeks ago," she said. "Their phones are disconnected and the apartment is mostly empty." I called Daniel immediately. He answered on the 4th ring. "Are they okay?" There was a pause. What happened? Their landlord called me. She says they disappeared. Another pause, longer this time. I thought they were staying with Linda's cousin. Did you ask them? I called. They said everything was fine. Everything is not fine. He arrived at the house 20 minutes later, still wearing the jacket from work. We stood in the entryway while he scrolled through his phone. Every call to his mother went to voicemail. Robert's number had been disconnected. The property manager had given me permission to collect anything left behind. Daniel drove us there, and neither of us spoke during the trip. The apartment looked as though someone had packed in a hurry. The kitchen cabinets were bare except for a chipped bowl and 3 tea bags. A stack of unopened medical bills sat on the counter. In the bedroom, the mattress was gone, but one of Linda's sweaters remained tangled around the closet door. On the living room floor was a cardboard box labeled Winter. Daniel opened it. Inside were photographs, 2 framed certificates, a ceramic angel, and a folder of papers held together by a rubber band. He lifted the folder and stopped. "What?" I asked. He handed it to me. The first page was a notice from a hospital. The second was a letter from an insurance company. The third was a printed email from a lender. Linda had been diagnosed with breast cancer. The insurance company had denied coverage for part of the treatment because the procedure had been categorized as out of network. The lender's email concerned a personal loan application. It had been rejected because of Robert's debt-to-income ratio. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note. "We're going to stay with Carol until we figure this out. Don't tell Daniel yet. He'll make it worse." Daniel read it over my shoulder. He sat down on the floor. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The old instinct rose in me immediately. Open the door, make room, solve the problem. It was the instinct that had gotten us into trouble before, but it was also the instinct that had made me help them in the first place. "They should have told us," Daniel said. "I know." "She has cancer." "I know." "We have a spare room." I looked toward him. "We have a spare room," he repeated more firmly. "And we have rules." His face changed. "I'm not talking about rules right now." "That is exactly when we have to talk about them." He stood up so quickly that the box tipped over. The ceramic angel struck the floor and lost one wing. "You're going to do this again?" "I'm saying we can help her without moving them back into the house. My mother is sick, and she needs treatment. That does not automatically mean she needs our deed, our address, or unrestricted access to every room." He turned away from me. At the hospital, Linda looked smaller than she had the last time I saw her. Her hair was still there, but thinner. A blue line marked the back of her hand where an IV had been removed. Robert sat beside the bed with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee he had not touched. When Daniel entered, Linda began to cry. Not dramatically, not loudly. She simply covered her face and folded forward. Robert stood. "We didn't want to burden you." Daniel looked at him. "You vanished. We went to Carol's." "Carol says you left yesterday." Robert's eyes moved to me. I could see the old calculation return. Not greed, exactly. Desperation. The measuring of a room, a couch, a hallway, a person's willingness to bend. "We only need so me-where to stay during treatment," he said. "How long?" I asked. Linda lowered her hands. "I don't know. That's not a criticism. I need an estimate. The doctors haven't given us one. Then we can arrange a short-term place near the hospital and revisit it when you know more." Robert's mouth tightened. "You own a house with an empty room." "We do." "And your wife would rather pay strangers than let families stay?" "I would rather provide a safe place with clear terms than repeat an arrangement that caused harm to everyone." Linda stared at me. "You still think we were trying to take your house?" "I think fear made you act as though you had a right to it." Robert looked at Daniel. "Are you going to let her speak to your mother like this?" Daniel did not answer immediately. That silence mattered more than anything he could have said. Finally, he pulled a chair beside the bed. "We'll pay for a furnished apartment near the hospital for 6 weeks," he said. "We'll cover the deposit and the first month. After that, we'll reassess with the social worker." Robert laughed once, without humor. 6-week S. It's a starting point. And when the 6 weeks are over, we decide then. His father looked at him as though he had become a stranger. "You used to have a heart." Daniel flinched. I reached into my bag and took out the printed agreement I had prepared in the parking lot. It included the amount we would pay, the address of the apartment, the dates, the hospital transportation schedule, and a sentence stating that the arrangement did not create residency rights in our home. I almost felt absurd handing it over in a hospital room, but Linda read it. She read every page, then she signed. Robert refused. I'm not signing something that treats us like tenants. It doesn't, I said. It treats the assistants as assistants. We are your parents. You are Daniel's parents. You are not co-owners of our house. The machine beside Linda's bed beeped. A nurse came in to check the line, and the conversation ended there. The furnished apartment was clean, close to the cancer center, and much smaller than our house. It had one bedroom, a sofa bed, a kitchenette, and a narrow balcony overlooking a parking garage. Linda moved in 2 days later. Robert did not sign the agreement, but he accepted the keys. For the first 3 weeks, things were almost peaceful. Daniel drove Linda to appointments. I arranged grocery deliveries and called the hospital's financial counselor. The counselor found a charity program that covered some of the denied treatment. We paid the application fee and the remaining balance for the apartment. Then the bank called me. The number was unfamiliar, so I almost let it go to voicemail. The caller identified herself as a fraud specialist and asked whether I had recently applied for a home equity line. I said no. She confirmed the address. My stomach tightened. Has anyone else had permission to use your property records? Permission for what? There's an application in process. The applicant supplied a copy of a utility bill, a tax statement, and a letter describing the property as a family residence. Who is the applicant? She gave me Robert's name. I asked her to freeze the application immediately. She said she needed a written statement, a copy of my identification, and proof of ownership. I gathered everything and sent it that afternoon. When Daniel came home, I was sitting at the dining table with the document spread in front of me. He took off his shoes. What happened? I slid the bank email toward him. He read it twice. No. Call your father. He wouldn't. Call him. Robert answered on the first ring. Daniel put the phone on speaker. Dad, did you apply for a loan using our house? There was a long silence. Then Robert said, It wasn't a loan against the house. The room seemed to narrow. What was it? Daniel asked. A bridge loan. Using the house as collateral? We needed medical expenses covered. You don't own the house. We had an agreement. I felt my hands go cold. What agreement? I asked. Robert's voice hardened. The one you refused to honor. There was no agreement giving you an interest in our property. Your wife made promises. I made a temporary housing arrangement. You told us we would always have a place there. I never said you could borrow against it. Linda's voice came faintly from the background. Robert, stop. He ignored her. You think paperwork makes you better than us. You think because your name is on a deed, you can erase 20 years of family. No one is erasing anything, Daniel said. You submitted documents to a bank claiming authority over property you don't own. I was trying to save your mother. By committing fraud? Robert hung up. Daniel remained still, phone in his hand. That night, he drove to the apartment alone. He returned after midnight. His cheek was red and the knuckles of his right hand were scraped. I stood up from the sofa. What happened? I hit the wall. Why? Because he said you pushed him into it. I waited. Daniel sat down and pressed his palms against his eyes. He has a folder, copies of everything. The old utility bills, the rental agreement, the photographs he took of the basement, even the email where you wrote that the house would be available while they recovered. That email said they could stay until they found stable housing. He says the words prove you gave them permanent use. Words do not prove ownership. I know. Does he? Daniel looked at me. He asked me to sign a statement saying he had a beneficial interest in the house. I felt something inside me settle into place. Not anger, certainty. And did you? No. The next morning, I contacted the attorney who had helped me during the original dispute. She advised us to stop discussing property matters by phone, send a formal notice to the lender, and preserve every message. She also recommended that Daniel sign a sworn declaration stating that he had never authorized his parents to pledge, transfer, sell, or borrow against the property. We met her that afternoon. She examined the bank documents, the old transfer paper, and the rental agreement. Then she asked a question neither of us expected. Has anyone ever recorded a document against the property? I checked before, I said. Nothing had changed. That was before this application. She searched the county database while we waited. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she turned the monitor toward us. A document had been filed 3 days earlier. It was not a deed. It was a memorandum of family agreement, claiming that Linda and Robert possessed an equitable interest in the property because they had contributed labor and household expenses during their stay. Attached was a copy of a document bearing my name. My signature appeared at the bottom. I recognized the page immediately. It had been the last page of a maintenance estimate I signed during the first winter. Someone had scanned the signature, removed the original text, and placed it beneath a paragraph stating that I granted Linda and Robert a permanent right to occupy the house. For a moment, I could not hear anything. The attorney enlarged the image. The signature was mine, but the writing above it was not. "This is fabricated," I said. "Yes," she replied. "And because it was filed, the title company will need to clear it formally." Daniel stared at the page. His father had not merely misunderstood the arrangement. He had manufactured a claim. The legal process took months. There were affidavits, notices, and a hearing before a judge who seemed less interested in the family history than in the dates, signatures, and chain of title. Robert insisted he had not forged anything. He said a document preparer had assembled the paperwork and that he believed it was legitimate. The document preparer, when contacted, claimed Robert had supplied the language and the signature file. Linda never appeared in court. Her treatment had become more complicated, and she sent a statement through her attorney saying she had not known what Robert intended. She admitted that she had asked him to find a way to keep us from being homeless again, but denied authorizing false documents. The judge removed the memorandum from the property record and ordered Robert to reimburse the filing costs. The district attorney declined to pursue criminal charges because the evidence did not establish who physically altered the document. That result frustrated me, but it also taught me something uncomfortable. A person can do serious damage without receiving the dramatic punishment everyone expects. The title was clear. The family was not. After the hearing, Daniel and I sat in the courthouse parking lot. Rain tapped against the windshield. "I don't know how to forgive him," Daniel said. "You don't have to decide today. He almost put a lien on our house." "I know. He told me he did it because he was scared. Both things can be true." He leaned back against the seat. "I spent years thinking if I kept everyone calm, nobody would get hurt. Did it work? No." He looked at me. "I thought choosing you meant abandoning them. Now I think refusing to choose was what allowed them to hurt you." I did not answer right away. Outside, people hurried across the parking lot with folders over their heads. A child jumped into a puddle and was pulled back by his father. Finally, I said, "You can love them without giving them access to everything." I'm learning. Linda completed treatment the following spring. The results were cautiously positive. She and Robert moved into another rental. This one paid partly through a housing assistance program and partly through a small monthly contribution from us. The contribution was not open-ended. It went directly to the landlord. We never gave Robert cash. We never allowed him to handle our documents. Every 6 months, we reviewed the arrangement. He complained about the restrictions. Linda accepted them. That difference changed the shape of our contact. Robert stopped coming to our house. Linda visited once with Daniel and sat on the back porch. She looked at the garden beds, the new locks, and the small camera mounted above the garage. "I'm sorry," she said. It was the first apology she had offered without adding the word "but." I believed she meant it. "I'm sorry too," I said. "I should have recognized how frightened you were before everything became a battle." She nodded. "But you were still wrong," I added. Her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said, "I was." That was all we said about it. Robert never apologized. He sent a birthday card the next year with no message inside. I kept it for a while, then threw it away. The house eventually became ordinary again. We painted the room they had occupied. We replaced the carpet where Robert had stored his tools. In the basement, behind an old shelving unit, I found one of Linda's handwritten calendars. Most of the dates had been crossed out. At the bottom of one page, she had written, "Ask them when we can stay." I stood there for a long time holding that paper. It was not proof of a master plan. It was proof of something more human and more dangerous. They had begun planning around our home before they admitted they were doing it. I burned the calendar in the backyard fire pit, not because I wanted to erase what happened, because I no longer needed to preserve every piece of it as evidence. The final lesson did not arrive during the hearing or the bank investigation. It came later, on a Saturday morning, when Daniel asked whether we could help another relative store furniture for a few weeks. He stopped before finishing the sentence. "We need to talk about it first," he said. I looked at him. The old version of Daniel would have brought the furniture home and explained afterward. The new version waited for an answer. We discussed the dates, the storage fee, the insurance, the number of items, and what would happen if the deadline changed. Then we said yes. The furniture stayed for exactly 3 weeks. On the 21st day, it left. No one shouted. No one claimed the garage. No one produced a document. It was almost boring. That was the payoff I had wanted all along. Not revenge, not an apology dramatic enough to repair every fracture. Just a household where kindness did not require surrender, where family could ask for help without disguising a demand, and where the word temporary had an actual ending. The house is still ours. But now, when someone walks through the front door, they know exactly why they are there, how long they can stay, and who has the authority to ask them to leave. And so do I. That clarity was tested sooner than I expected. Almost 8 months after the furniture left, I received an email from a company I did not recognize. The subject line read, "Final notice. Ownership documentation required." I assumed it was spam until I saw our street address in the first paragraph. The message claimed that a storage container associated with our property contained unclaimed personal effects belonging to Robert and Linda. It said the items had been placed in storage under my name and that I was responsible for either paying the outstanding balance or authorizing disposal. I read it twice. Then I opened the attached inventory. There were 37 items listed. Some were familiar. 2 plastic bins of winter clothes, an old television, a broken recliner, 3 boxes of kitchen supplies. Others had never existed in our house. A computer tower, a set of antique coins, several pieces of jewelry, a box labeled family documents. The total storage balance was just over $4,000. I called the number at the bottom of the email. A woman answered after 3 rings. "Good morning, this is North Valley Storage Solutions. My name is..." I gave my name and address. I received a notice concerning property supposedly stored under my account. She typed for several seconds. "Yes, I see it. The account was opened in your name last year. I never opened an account with you. Do you have the account number?" I read it aloud. "The signature on the contract is yours," she said. My stomach tightened. "Can you send me a copy?" We already sent one to the email address on file. Not that copy, the original application, identification used, payment history, everything. There was a pause. "Are you disputing the account?" "I'm reporting identity fraud." Her voice changed. It became more careful. "I'll place an administrative hold on the unit. That gives you 72 hours before any action is taken. Do not release or dispose of anything. I'll note that. And do not allow anyone access." Another pause. "I'll note that too." I hung up and went to find Daniel. He was in the garage, repairing a cabinet hinge. When I told him what had happened, he set the screwdriver on the workbench. "Robert?" "I don't know yet." "You know." "I know it looks like him." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. "Did they say when the account opened?" "Last August." That was 2 months after the furniture had left our garage. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The garage smelled like sawdust and motor oil. A radio played quietly near the side door. Some announcer discussing baseball statistics as though nothing in the world had changed. Daniel took out his phone. "I'm calling the bank." "Why?" "To see whether he used our account information." The bank found no unauthorized withdrawals. North Valley said the monthly charges had been paid with a prepaid card. The application contained a scanned driver's license, a utility bill, and an electronic signature. The license number belonged to me. The image was not a copy of my actual license. It was a poor alteration. My face had been placed over someone else's photograph, and the address had been changed. The utility bill was real, but it was an old statement from our internet provider that Robert had seen during the house stay. The signature looked like mine because it was mine. I recognized it immediately. It had been lifted from the memorandum Robert had filed against the property. For the first time since the court hearing, I felt something colder than anger. He had kept the file, and he had used it again. I contacted the police, the storage company, our bank, and the credit bureaus. The officer who came to the house took photographs of the email and the documents. He asked whether I knew what might be inside the unit. "I know some of it belonged to Robert and Linda," I said. "I don't know about the rest." "Any reason they would use your identity?" "Yes." I explained the earlier document filing. He reviewed the report from that incident on his tablet. "So this is a continuation?" "I think so." "Could be," he said, "but we'll need evidence tying him to the account." The following morning, I drove to North Valley Storage with Daniel. The facility sat behind a strip mall surrounded by a tall metal fence topped with loops of wire. Cameras watched every row. At the office, a manager named Susan placed a folder on the counter. "I can't let you enter the unit without a detective," she said, "but I can show you the paperwork." The first page was the rental agreement. The name printed at the top was mine. The address was ours. The emergency contact was Robert. I stared at it. "Why would you accept this?" I asked. Susan looked uncomfortable. "The application was submitted online. The identification passed our automated check. The first payment cleared." "Did anyone come in person?" "No, the account was opened remotely." Daniel leaned over the counter. "What email address was used?" Susan pointed to the form. It was an address I had never seen before, but the username contained my middle initial and our house number. "Can you tell when the account was accessed? We can provide that to law enforcement." The detective arrived 20 minutes later. His name was Alvarez. He wore a dark jacket and carried a small evidence case. Susan led us through the gate to Unit C-118. The lock was new. A red notice had been taped across the door. It warned that unauthorized entry could result in criminal charges. Detective Alvarez photographed the lock, the notice, and the unit number. Then he cut the lock with bolt cutters. The door rolled upward with a metallic groan. The first thing I saw was the recliner. It was the same brown recliner Robert had brought into our living room, the one he had claimed was too valuable to leave behind. It sat near the center of the unit with a blanket thrown over it. Behind it were rows of boxes. Some had labels in Robert's handwriting. Others were plain cardboard. Along the left wall stood a wooden cabinet I had never seen. On top of it were 2 black cases and a canvas bag. Daniel stayed at the entrance. I stepped inside only when Alvarez asked me to identify the items. The winter clothes were theirs. The television was theirs. The kitchen boxes were theirs. The antique coins were not. Neither was the jewelry. Neither was the computer tower. In the back corner, I found a filing box labeled with our last name. I opened it. Inside were copies of our mortgage statement, insurance declarations, tax records, the old court memorandum, and photographs of our house. Not pictures from inside, pictures taken from outside. Our front door, the garage, the side gate, the basement window, the utility meter. Some had timestamps from late at night. Daniel saw the photographs and stepped backward. Why would he take those? I picked up one image. It showed our house during a snowstorm. The upstairs lights were on. The date was 3 days after Robert and Linda moved out. I don't know. Alvarez placed an evidence marker beside the box. Don't touch anything else. In the filing box, there was also a printed email exchange between Robert and someone named Marcus. The messages were about establishing possession, proving occupancy, and creating a paper trail. One line read, "If the property is tied up, they can't sell or refinance without dealing with us." Another said, "The storage account gives us a legitimate address for the contents." The final message was from Robert. Once the items are there, it becomes a dispute over ownership, not trespassing. Daniel stared at Teehee's screen. He planned to put our property in a position where we couldn't prove what belonged to us. Alvarez photographed every page. The family documents box contained more than our records. It held copies of Linda's medical bills, Robert's tax notices, and letters from 2 creditors. The computer tower contained no hard drive, but the detective found a small flash drive taped beneath the desk drawer. That discovery changed the investigation. The drive contained scanned forms, photographs, and a spreadsheet. Some files concerned our house. Others referred to 3 additional properties in the county. Each property had a different owner. Each file included a note about temporary occupancy, unpaid expenses, or alleged promises. Robert had not invented the idea with us. He had been collecting methods. The storage unit also contained a stack of mail addressed to Robert at our house. Most of it was junk, but several pieces were official notices. He had used our address as a mailing address months after leaving. One envelope came from the county assessor's office. Another came from a lender. Alvarez looked at me. "Did he ever ask you to forward mail?" "No." "Did you forward anything?" "Only once. A medical bill. I thought it was an accident." He wrote that down. At the bottom of the unit, beneath the recliner, we found a metal cash box. It was locked. Alvarez obtained a warrant the next day. Inside were 3 prepaid phones, a roll of blank labels, a stamp bearing my last name, and a small notebook. The notebook contained dates and short phrases. Garage access, insurance renewal, Daniel conflict avoidant, Linda health leverage. I read that last line twice. It was not a plan written by frightened people improvising from one crisis to another. It was an inventory of weaknesses. Mine was listed as proof-focused. Daniel's was guilt-responsive. Linda's was credible sympathy. Robert's own name appeared beside the words, "No direct contact until pressure begins." I closed the notebook. For days, I could not sleep without checking the locks. Every car passing the house made me look through the curtains. I knew the account had been closed, the unit secured, and the police were investigating, but knowledge did not immediately restore safety. The most unsettling part was how ordinary the house looked. Morning coffee still dripped into the glass pot. The mail still arrived at 10:30. The neighbor's dog still barked whenever a delivery truck stopped nearby. Nothing had been physically taken from us, but the boundary around our life had been crossed again, quietly and methodically. Robert was arrested 2 weeks later. Marcus was arrested the same day. He turned out to be the document preparer who had helped with the false memorandum. The storage account connected them through login records, phone locations, and payments made from a card registered to Marcus's sister. The police found no evidence that Linda had participated in the storage scheme. When Daniel called her, she was silent for so long that I wondered whether the call had dropped. Finally, she said, "I didn't know." "Did you know Robert had boxes somewhere?" "I knew he was keeping things. I didn't know about your papers." "Did you know he was using our address?" "No." Her breathing became uneven. I told him to stop. "When?" "After the court." "Did he?" "No." She did not ask us to help him. She did not defend him. She simply said, "I should have told you." "Yes," Daniel said. "I was afraid." "I know." "That doesn't make it better." "No." The case took almost a year to reach trial. During that time, Robert sent no letters. Marcus accepted a plea agreement and agreed to testify. The prosecutor explained that the evidence showed a scheme to create false claims against property owners who had offered temporary housing or financial help. Our house was the most developed case, but not the only one. One victim was an elderly man who had let a former co-worker sleep in his spare room. Another was a woman who had allowed her cousin to keep belongings in her basement. In each situation, Robert and Marcus had searched for documents that could be repurposed later. They had not always succeeded, but they had treated generosity as a RESO RCE to be mined. At trial, Marcus testified that Robert believed people who helped relatives were unlikely to involve police because they feared embarrassment. He said the first person to feel ashamed usually gives up, Marcus told the jury. I sat beside Daniel behind the prosecutor's table. That sentence hurt more than the forged signature because it was accurate. We had delayed reporting. We had softened statements. We had worried about appearing vindictive. We had mistaken privacy for protection. The prosecutor asked Marcus how Robert told you so.